This is Andrew Plato, President and CEO of ANITIAN. Thanks again for joining our webinar this morning. Don't become a target selling risk management to skeptical executives. I really appreciate everybody taking some time out this morning to listen to our webinar. I'm sure you will find this a very educational and insightful webinar. We will be recording this, and there is a period for questions at the end. Use the chat feature or the question feature that's in the webinar utility to ask those questions. Okay. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, quite simply, my intention today is to talk to you about risk management, but specifically how to persuade executives to invest in better risk management or information security. Now, throughout this presentation, you're going to hear me talk about risk management, but quite frankly, you could almost use risk management and information security or an information security program somewhat interchangeably. The idea is that we want to help empower you as a security practitioner to become better at communicating and persuading leadership to make the investments that many of you already know you need to make to improve the information security of your organization. Now, we prefer to take it from a risk management perspective, and that's why we call this selling risk management to skeptical executives. So the outline for the presentation today is we got to start and really set the foundation of this discussion, which is why are executives so skeptical? I know many of you, and I'm looking at some of the names here, I know many of you have had your challenges and issues with getting executive leadership on board and getting that famous executive buy-in. Why has executive leadership become so skeptical? So we're going to spend a few minutes talking about that. Then I want to get to really the meat of this presentation, and I want to talk about how you can change the conversation within your organization to talk about threat and risk and really get executives on board, listening, and paying attention to what the critical issues are. And we're going to walk through a series of steps of how you can kind of manipulate this conversation. And this should empower you to really step up the conversation throughout the organization and ultimately be able to kind of sell the whole effort to leadership and get that infamous buy-in that we're always trying to get. And then the latter part of this, I want to give you guys some real nuts and bolts, common threats and common solutions. So when we conduct risk assessments, we find that a lot of the threats that we're documenting are very common. We're using them they exist in almost every risk assessment we do. And when you learn a little more about the process we're going to talk about, I think you'll find that the number of threats that exist in your organization are fairly low. Most organizations only have a handful of real threats that they have to contend with. And so we want to mate those up with what some of the common solutions are to show you how you can, again, keep that conversation going and be able to really get into the nitty-gritty and nuts and bolts of how to do better risk management and to also help make your executives feel more confident and comfortable with the kinds of investments they're going to make. Okay. So quick introduction for myself. Again, looking at the names here, I see a lot of you already know who I am, but there's a few new faces on here. So I'm Andrew Plato. I'm President and CEO of ANITIAN. I've been doing this a very long time. My history in the information security field is robust. I discovered SQL injection back in 1995, of which I probably should have published more. I would have gotten a lot more fame. We developed our own risk assessment approach. The thing, though, that I think is very relevant to this presentation is two things. Number one, at ANITIAN, we've been working a lot in risk assessment, and we've been interacting a lot with executive leadership. And that on top of something I started about 2 years ago. I joined a CEO group and have been getting CEO coaching and working with a team of other executives. I've had the opportunity to meet a lot of executives in that period, and I've had a lot of conversations with CEOs, CIOs, CISOs about their information security programs, about what they're doing, about what their worries, what their concerns are. And that really flavors a lot about what we're going to talk, a lot of what we're going to be talking about today. So a quick overview on ANITIAN. Again, I think a lot of you know our story, but ANITIAN has gone through a few changes recently. You might notice our logo changed a bit. We dropped enterprise security from our name. We like to say that was our VAR name. ANITIAN is now almost entirely focused on services, but really what it comes down to is our business now is completely focused on empowering people like you, people who are watching this presentation today. Our business is to make you a great leader, to make you a excellent information security practitioner or leader. Because fundamentally at ANITIAN, we believe that good security, whether it's information security or otherwise, is going to make the world a better place. If you look back to history, you see that in order for there to be any form of innovation or growth, you have to have security. Security, when it is practical, pragmatic, realistic, can be a very empowering force, both at the community level and at the information security or IT level. And we believe at ANITIAN that good security comes from these rational scientific methods of analysis and the process of empowering people like yourself, people like yourself to be the leaders that you already really are, and empower you and give you those tools and that those great ideas that are going to make you better at what you do. Okay, so let's start and let's talk about where we're at sort of in the world of CIOs and CEOs at this executive level. Why are these people so skeptical now? As I mentioned to you, I've had the opportunity lately to meet with a lot of senior leadership, both at small and at large companies. And I'm hearing really consistent stories and really consistent things from these people. Quite frankly, what I'm hearing over and over and over again is that they feel that the security programs that in many cases they may have already invested in is really failing to protect the business. They feel like compliance is this persistent nuisance that they're never able to really get their hands on. They're really fed up with vendors and salespeople and VARs just constantly pushing the next new shiny object on them. I heard from a CIO just a couple of days ago. He was telling me, I've just so had it with all these VARs and vendors and coming in here and telling me I got to buy this and that. And it's like a nonstop treadmill of technologies we have to buy, and they never seem to actually work. In that same sentence, he was telling me, and then I look, I read the news, and it seems like the hackers that are out there, these overseas organizations and these state-sponsored hackers and hacktivists, it's just like they're getting stronger and bolder, and it doesn't matter what I buy. It never seems to really stem the tide. And we called this presentation "Don't Be a Target" for a couple of obvious reasons. Target, of course, big in the news right now, but I mean, Target is really a good example of some of the problems that the industry is having. And I know we can sit around and all blame Target for all this, but frankly, Target is like a lot of other organizations out there. They're like Michael's. They're like all these other breaches we're hearing about. They had good technology. They had made investments in some cutting-edge products out there. They have a team of great security engineers. They have really smart people working for them, but it still didn't work. And that's what leadership is saying. All we hear are excuses, this constant cycle of excuses as to why this won't work and why that won't work. And I heard one executive, and this was about a month or two ago, he's saying, I get these reports, these metrics and these massive reports. I don't know what they mean. I don't have time to read them. I don't understand them. They don't make sense to me. They're about hackers and these Russians and these people overseas and Chinese and APT and all these other things. I don't know what all that means. I don't spend all day with this kind of stuff. I don't know what to do with this data. I'm getting all this data, but it doesn't really seem to make any sense to me. And that's really what a lot of leadership is saying to us. They're saying this risk management process that the industry is kind of selling and pushing on us, we just don't get it. We don't understand it. And part of that problem is that it's the big data problem, right? Last few years, I mean, you can't walk around like RSA or any of these conferences without being like bombarded with big data, big data, big data this, big data that. We have big data. They have big data. You know, big data is everywhere, right? Everybody's got a big data solution. Well, nobody needs or wants big data. Big data is a concept, but it's not something anybody really wants because data doesn't do you any good. I can have gigatons of data, but if I don't know what that data means, it's kind of meaningless. And these systems that we keep buying, these technologies, they just spew out alerts and they desensitize the entire organization. Quite frankly, that seems to be what might have happened in the Target breach, is that the stories, and this is all public information, the stories that are out there is that they actually were getting these alerts, but nobody kind of followed up on them. Quite frankly, that's what we see at a lot of organizations. I don't think Target is unique in this regard. These products get put in. They're not really well planned because they're bought based on these hard pitches from vendors, and they get put in and they're never really kind of maintained. They're just sort of thrown in default configuration, and everybody goes, okay, we bought a FireEye. We're good to go. We're secure. No, we're really not. The language and the technologies are confusing to executive leadership. They don't really understand what they mean. This is an example I had in another presentation, and I thought it was very fitting here. Now, it's a little difficult to read. This is kind of a big, I had to shrink it down. But this is a worksheet example from a typical risk assessment, risk management program. I think this is FAIR's worksheet, but it might be Octave. Anyways, this is a very classic sort of risk management worksheet. I can tell you right now, you put this in front of any executive leader, they're not going to know what any of this means. They're not going to read this. And I don't care how brilliant or how diligent you were in trying to craft this and how precise and specific it is, nobody is going to read this. It just doesn't make sense to them. It's incomprehensible. I mean, the joke here at the end is, well, this system is a 61. Well, a 61 what? What does that number mean? Now, I've said that a lot before in the sort of risk assessment world, and this is the challenge we have right now in information security. We have these systems spewing alerts. We have big data everywhere, and we have risk processes that just aren't getting the kind of intelligence that executive leadership needs. Which gets me really to my next important point, this myth of executive buy-in. I don't think you can go to any security presentation from any security company anywhere, and one of the first slides they're going to show you is, you have to get executive buy-in. You have to get executive buy-in is a requirement. If you don't have executive buy-in, it'll never work. There is no such thing as executive buy-in. It is a joke. It is a myth. It doesn't happen. Nobody buys into security. And that's, I think, the problem, is that people say, well, I have to go get executive buy-in. Okay, well, how do you do that? And the reality is that we don't buy. Buying is fun. Everybody likes to buy something. I'm going to go buy a new car this weekend. That's fun. But nobody says, I'm going to go buy some important security compliance controls that will control my organization and reduce risk. Nobody does that. That doesn't happen. That's because that's not fun. Security has to be sold, not bought. You have to sell the concepts to executive leadership. Call it persuasion. I like to say sell because, quite frankly, that's literally what you're doing. You're trying to sell these ideas. We have to persuade or sell this to leadership to get them to buy it. They're not going to just buy it because it's sitting on the shelf. And that's the problem that a lot of security vendors and companies and, frankly, a lot of consultants and a lot of programs have. They start with this idea of, well, we have to get executive buy-in, but they don't ever really go to that next level, which is, okay, now you've got to sell it to get that buy-in. And how do you do that? Well, you've got to be able to talk in a language that is buyable. What is the threat? What is the risk? What are the solutions? What is this all going to yield for the organization? That's got to become the conversation. And what that means is that you're going to have to sell this, which means you've got to make a case. You've got to clarify what the deal is, because executives are going to think in that way. What's the deal? What am I getting? What am I buying? What am I going to get in return? I can tell you, I've run a company for 20 years, and all the other executives I know, we all talk in that kind of language. Okay, I'm going to make this kind of investment. What am I going to get in return for that? How much am I going to get? I go out and hire a new marketing company, for example, and I sit down with them, and they tell me what they can do for us as an organization. I'm comparing the cost, the investment that I'm going to be making, to the value I'm going to get out of that. And information security has to do the exact same thing. And then, frankly, you got to close them, just like any salesperson has to do. And that's why we say you're selling information security. You're not just getting them to buy into it. What that really comes down to, and I've said this in other presentations before, which is leaders don't need big data, they need actionable intelligence. And this picture here that I made kind of explains the whole idea. You got to take all this stuff, the compliance, the products, the risk assessment, threat intelligence, disaster recovery, DevOps, all these concepts, and I just sort of threw a bunch of them on there. There's probably 20 more that could be in that funnel. And they got to funnel down to something. And what that something is a picture. It's a picture that you are going to paint. And it has to be clear. It has to be something that makes sense. It can't be some abstract, Jason Pollock sort of thing. And +1 to anybody who knows who that is. Right? It has to be a clear picture. No impressionism here, right? We're going for Soviet-era realism. But you didn't expect an art lesson this webinar, right? We need a clear picture of what the future is, what is going to go on, what we're going to do. And that's got to filter down to very clean, clear language. Now, in the CEO world, we call this the painted picture. There's actually a CEO consultant who talks about this concept. This is how he actually grew his business. It's actually very interesting stuff. You want to type it into Google. I believe his name is David Cameron. He's a really interesting speaker. I actually saw him just recently. He talks about the painted picture and why that's important. That's a leadership concept, but it actually is extremely applicable to information security as well. Paint a clear, clean picture of what your information security program is going to be and provide actionable intelligence, not data, intelligence. And that ultimately will lead to the risk management that we want, to the management of risk, to the information security programs that we want. Okay, so how are we going to change this conversation? Well, here's Serious Cat to tell us. I are Serious Cat. First step to changing this conversation is we got to get some common language. And it's really important that everybody kind of be on the same page here in terms of the language that's being used for risk management for security. Now, the problem with this is that there's a lot of words, there's a lot of terminology, there's a lot embedded inside security. I mean, we're always throwing these terms around, and to us they make perfect sense. But quite frankly, there's really only 6 words that you need to get everybody on board. We call this the core 6. And in our risk assessment training, we're very clear. This is, you got to start right here and just get everybody on board with these core 6. Now, it's not just get them to understand what they mean and explain them, but simplify them, highly simplify them. So, as we like to say, threat, big complex concept, but the definition is simple. It's just simply something bad that could happen. And it doesn't need to be any more complicated than that. And that's a terminology that anybody, even executives, can understand. What's a vulnerability? It's simply a weakness. It's a weakness we have. It's that weak link in our chain. What is the impact? It's how bad it'll hurt when we get hit with it. What's the probability? The probability is how likely is that going to happen in the next 12 months or 24 months? What's a control? Control is just something to stop that bad thing from happening or make it not hurt so bad, right? And risk, and this is an important term, is risk is the assessment of that threat. Risk is a word that is consistently misused in our industry. And it's probably the most important thing is get everybody to understand that risk is an assessment. It is a valuation. It is we have a high risk, we have a low risk. Risk is never a problem. Risk is always a some sort of quantifiable thing. High, medium, low is our preference. If you want to use numbers, fine. We prefer not to use numbers in our practice, but it is some kind of assessment based on the environment. It, in some respects, is your painted picture. The risk, the analysis of where you're at. Okay, now that you've got some basic terminology, you've kind of got your executive leadership, you started using this terminology consistently, the next major step is to do what we call the how do you kill the business exercise. Now, I actually did this exercise a while back ago, and I found it very revelatory. I did it for my own business, but I've helped other executives do this as well. This has got to be one of the best exercises that any information security person can ever do, but quite frankly, it's something you need to facilitate with leadership. So ideally what you want to do is you want to try and get your leadership together. Now, I know some places that's very difficult, but find some way to at least get some of the key leaders either in the same room or on a conference call and facilitate a conversation. And there's really only two questions you need to ask and get them talking about, which is, how would you kill this company or this organization? What are the steps you would take to harm up this business? Now, I can tell you, every executive leader in the world can answer that question. We all know the weaknesses in our company. We all know the problems that exist in the organization. And a lot of times we just don't want to verbalize them. We're afraid to verbalize them. And that's why switching this around and say, let's just do a fun little exercise. Let's think about the ways we would harm our business. Where are the areas we would attack? What would we go after? And you'll find some interesting answers. Well, competitor steals our formula. Or, if you're a healthcare organization, they stole a bunch of patient records. That would kill us in the news, right? We have a serious credit card breach, millions of credit cards. I mean, we'd all lose our jobs if that happened. Quite frankly, you're going to get a lot of answers out of that. And what you're hearing from these people is threat. They're talking threat now. How do you kill the organization? Now, the reverse of that is to kind of also talk about, well, what's valuable to this company? What do we have in this organization that's valuable? People, data, systems, proprietary intellectual property, access processes, whatever. But again, most senior leadership should be able to pretty clearly delineate what they consider to be the jewels of the kingdom, the highly valuable parts of the company. Now, a couple of things that while you're having this conversation, that you got to kind of steer it. First off, you want to try to avoid the forward-looking statements. You want to talk in the now. Write about what's going on now. Secondly, you want to try and redirect away from the real sensationalist stuff. The volcanoes going off, the asteroids hitting the planet, the Russian mob, coming in and taking over. You want to kind of get away from that sensational stuff. You want to get down to the reality. What is the most likely way that this company is going to get hit? Now, while you're doing this process, something really important you've got to do, and I learned this in my CEO training, and I have to tell you, it was one of the most profoundly valuable little tidbits I've learned. Pay attention to how each person feels. Not entirely, pay attention to what they say, but ask yourself the question, what are you feeling? What is that person feeling? And that's why it's important to sometimes do these in person, because you can't really get that over the phone. Even if you're doing a one-on-one conversation, what do they feel? Now, the answer to that question, frankly, isn't as important as what does it do to you. By merely asking yourself that question in your head, your body language, your entire demeanor, and your engagement with that executive will naturally change. They will naturally start to buy into what you're saying. It's a very strange little quirk of human beings. But the minute you start to think about them and ask questions about them, your body, you physiologically start to lock into them and create a bond between them. And so that's why I give you that little tidbit. It's an important little piece, and it will help you make a connection with these people, which is something that's important to this process. In order to make the sale, you need to be able to connect with them. but also it's going to help you understand them better and where they're coming from. And you want to write down what these people are saying. You want to write down the threats because, quite frankly, you probably already know the threats that are relevant to your business. You don't need an outsider to tell you them. You already know them. And all you got to do is get them down on paper. Now, one last little tidbit I would add to this is beware of hostility. Anybody who is hostile toward this process probably has something to hide. In fact, they do have something to hide. Hostility, as we like to say in consulting, is almost always, nearly always, a case of insecurity. And so sometimes that's difficult to work around. And the strategy there is to simply back off and let that person have the room they need and re-engage them at a later date. And that does happen. This conversation can sometimes get people really fired up. Okay, once you've conducted this exercise, or while you're conducting this exercise, you want to keep these conversations centered around these threats. What is the threat? What is the likelihood? And what is the impact of these? And this should continue forward even after this exercise. When you're talking and you're presenting and you're interacting with your team and with the rest of the organization, okay, is talking about, well, what's the threat to our organization? A couple of little pieces of advice here. First off, don't talk about threat actors or products at all. It doesn't matter who is attacking you. And I know it's really super exciting to talk about who. The Mandians and Fire Eyes of the world love to get us all fired up on who's attacking us. It's the Russians, it's the Chinese, it's the bad guys, it's them, it's the smelly people. It's somebody who's just evil and needs to be crushed, killed, beaten, pummeled, tortured, maimed, and squashed out of existence. Nobody cares. It's not relevant to building a program. It doesn't matter who attacks you. It doesn't matter if it's those scary people far, far away from you that live in the land of dragons. It doesn't matter if it's the pimple-faced dweeb down the street. It doesn't matter who attacks you. And that is one of the misnomers and the misdirections that this industry has done to a lot of us. They've gotten us all off topic talking about who. It doesn't matter who. And that's why I say keep that conversation back to what's the threat? What's the threat? The other thing I would say, and of course don't talk about products at this point because that's just going to that's another misdirection. Again, the industry likes to get us talking about products because they want to sell us products. Okay, and I know this intimately because I did that once upon a time. I was a product sales guy, and I did it, and I'm guilty of doing that myself. Products isn't the story here. At this point, while we're trying to build a program, we want to talk about threat. Now, the other thing is we need to distill threat down. We've got to get it down to its fundamentals. What are we really talking about? And again, I've thrown kind of two examples up here, and this is the challenge we have, is that it's easy for us to go off on kind of these, well, you know, zero-day attacks and APT, and we need this, and, you know, we got to do that, and we got to catch these bad guys and squash and beat them and, you know, shave them and do all this. That's not the threat. You know, in this example I gave here, the threat's malware. Most of the threats that we have discovered and that we use in our risk assessment practice are sometimes 1 and 2 words. That's your threat. The threat is not Russian criminal organizations or the Chinese. It's malware. Malware is the tool they use. Who cares that it's them? It doesn't matter who it is. They got malware. And that malware is bad, and we need to stop the malware. Let's quit focusing on stopping the criminal organization. You're not going to. That's impossible. You're not going to bring down criminal organizations. They're going to exist from now until the end of time. Your job is to stop them from doing the bad things they do. So the threat is simple. Distill it right down to what the core piece of information it is. And let's get them categorized. Simplify those threats into categories. And here are the categories we like to use: technical, reputational, financial, regulatory, physical, and relational. Relational is my favorite. I like to talk about relational. Right? And I've given a couple examples here, and you'll notice these are simple, right? Like a regulatory threat, unsupported systems. We have unsupported systems. That's actually a vulnerability. But it's a regulatory threat. We have a threat, a regulatory threat, and the vulnerability is unsupported systems like Windows XP, right? Now we're talking threat, and we've categorized it. We have a physical threat. of a tornado or weather events, or maybe we do have volcanoes, right? We have reputational threat of data leakage and something being made public. What's the vulnerability there? And we have relational threats. I like to talk about relational threats because it's one that a lot of people don't think about, which is you have third-party relationships. What are the threats to those relationships? Your contracts, your agreements. What about a third party who's unable to provide you the services you need? What are the dependencies of a relationship you have and the threats to those relationships? For example, some of them can be as simple as if you form a partnership with an organization, a third-party provider, and the company is flimsy or weak and they're going to fall apart at any moment. Well, that's a threat to you, of course, now. So by categorizing these threats and getting them into these very basic categories, now the executive leadership has something they can get their hands around. I get this. As if I'm an executive leader and you come to me and say, here's the threats we have. We have technical threats, we have reputational threats, we have, Now, you're going to find these are also going to align to the risks you're going to talk about and how you analyze risk. And that really gets down to the next step in this process, which is you need to conduct a risk assessment. Now, that's a whole presentation in and of itself. And I have a whole presentation about how to conduct a risk assessment. But this is why risk assessment is so important. You need to be doing this very early in the stages of building or rebuilding a program. You have to start with an organizational risk assessment or a fairly wide-ranging risk assessment so that you can get those details on where you have serious risk, okay? And I've put an example of what this report should look like. And it frankly shouldn't be any more complicated than what you see right here. Now we have, at ANITIAN we do risk assessments, and our whole methodology, and I'm not going to go down this too far because I understand we're here to talk about a little different topic, but when we do these, our whole point is really to squash, condense, and simplify all this down to this kind of data right here. Here's our regulatory risk. Here's our legal risk. Here's our reputational risk, our technical risks, okay? Summarize that because that's something an executive can read in a few minutes in a boardroom. And now they've got a pretty good overview of what we're talking about here. But you'll notice there's a couple of things. Number one, it doesn't talk about products. We're not talking about any of that quite yet. This point, we're simply delivering intelligence. And intelligence is that distillation of all the data. That's what a risk assessment really does. A risk assessment should distill all the data of your organization down to what the key threats are, the vulnerabilities you have, and then, of course, the assessment of risk. Now, the next step in this, once you've actually done that risk assessment, and quite frankly, this should be done kind of in tandem with the risk assessment effort, is to simplify the solution. Honestly, there are only 3 solutions to any security challenge you have in your organization. There's controls, firewalls, gear, right? Firewalls, IPSs, web filters, software, better configurations of systems, hardening, some sort of technical or physical control, locks on doors, video cameras, okay? Controls. A big and important part of your risk reduction strategy, and I would argue probably the most important part. That's why they should be first. You should always focus on control first. But right behind that is process and practice. Processes, policies, practices, operational processes, better disaster recovery processes, better improved monitoring processes. Incident response is a good example of that. Alerting, better alerting is a process to some extent, with, of course, tied very closely to the controls you have. So control and process, or control and policy. And then the last one is people. And again, while controls and processes are great, they're only as good as the people running them. And you need people. You got to have people to run this. And that's an important, integral part of what you're trying to sell to executive leadership here. You're trying to tell them we need controls, we need processes, and we need people. The triad of success, let's call it, okay? Controls, process, people. But when I say people, it's not just I need a bunch of, guys sitting in a room, or girls sitting in a room, or people sitting in a room, right? it's not just people like physical, actual, live, living, smelly people. It's also a culture of trust. It's a culture where people want to actually do what needs to get done. So you have to kind of look beyond just the, I need a bunch of guys to do stuff, right, to I need a bunch of people to do stuff, but I also need an environment where those people have the freedom, have the ability to do what they need to do. So people is a kind of a dual thing. And again, you need to sell this to executive leadership. Okay, when you're getting down, you're getting close to being able to make this pitch now. And what I tell you at this point is don't make this about your other companies or yourself. And again, big mistake I see a lot of security people make is it's all about them. Well, I need this, I want this, I got to do this, I. When it becomes about you, nobody wants to do it, okay? Sorry, that's just the way the world works. Executive leadership is not in a position to help you with your career. You need to deal with that on your own. It needs to be about the organization, about the whole, okay? And it doesn't matter what other companies are doing, quite frankly. It's got to be about you, your business. What are your missions? What are you trying to do? We here in the United States have a real problem with this whole sort of keeping up with the Joneses thing. And trust me, your vendors and VARs are going to play that card super hard on you. They're going to come in and they're going to do this whole, well, the big boys at Big Boy Company, they've got one of our impressive cool boxes. You better get one too. And it works. It works in the United States. It doesn't work in other countries, incidentally, as well. It works on us because we have this whole sort of keeping up with the Joneses part of our culture. You got to break that. It doesn't matter that Big Boy and Sons has the Big Boy Next Generation, whatever. It doesn't matter because they're not you, okay? Right? You need to get in the you need to get out of the anti-competitor business and get into the pro-you business. That's another CEO thing we always talk about in training is quit focusing on the other guys and focus on you, your business, what you're trying to build. Appeal to people's ethics. This is the right thing to do. When you're talking to executive leadership, a lot of leaders have a very innate sense of what is right and wrong for the business, and you have to appeal to that. Nobody is going to get in front of the board and say, I think we really should lie, cheat, and steal, right? They might be kind of saying that, right? And that might be maybe part of your grand mission as a company. God, I hope not, but I'm sure those companies exist. But nobody's really going to come right out and say that. Right? You get in front of people and say, hey, we got to do the right things here. We got to take care of ourselves, and we got to take care of our people, our business, our mission. And that's why the next is to appeal to self and appeal to mission. Right? When I say appeal to self, appeal to their self. Right? We need to protect our jobs, everybody here. We all want to have jobs. We all want to grow. We all want to go places. Well, the way we're going to do that is we're going to protect our clients, our customers, the data that we have. So appeal to mission, appeal to self, and appeal to ethics. Okay? But you got to simplify these answers, and you got to start coming up with real numbers. I can tell you as an executive, I get pitched things all the time from vendors and other places all over the place, and they're always like, we have this great solution. Okay, what does it cost? Well, I'm not quite ready to tell you what it costs. Okay, we're done here. Goodbye. Click. I'm not going to talk to you unless you can very clearly quantify the investment I have to make here, because I need to know that. And like it or not, that's a critical decision-making process going on in my head as an executive, and it's going on in the heads of all the executives that you have to interact with. What have I got to spend? Now, the way to do this is to contrast spend against value, because, again, that's a cost-benefit analysis, and that's what all of us executives intimately understand. We have data worth $1 gazillion, $1 billion, $100 million, $5, I don't care, whatever. Figure out what that number is. And frankly, the executives probably could tell you that. Ask them, what do you think our data is worth? Well, we're worth $500 million. Okay, well, our data is worth at least that, or maybe half that, right? Okay, so let's say our data is worth $500 million. Okay, what are the controls going to cost us that we need to implement? And when I say those costs, they need to be real, honest costs. And that cost needs to be the product plus the people to do that. And that's why you got people down there. You're going to have to hire people to use all this. Now, this is a part where you can get those VARs and sales guys working for you. Because guys, they love to make quotes, right? So get out and get them going and getting all those quotes, right? So call up your VAR and say, hey, hi, I need a quote for, 27 different products. Trust me, they'll jump through hoops because they love putting out quotes, right? So get them to quote. Put all these numbers together and be able to present it. as we spend X to protect N value. And then you need to ask yourself an important question, which is, would you actually spend that amount of money yourself? And if the answer is no, then you need to completely change the pitch, because it isn't going to work. It's ludicrous to ask somebody to spend millions of dollars to protect hundreds of dollars worth of data. That is just ludicrous. And I don't care what anybody or what any VAR vendor or security consultant tells you, it is ludicrous. And you got to put it in the context of your own life, right? Think about the salary you make, your total income or your total net worth of your house, right? Your household, right? Well, would you spend that amount to protect yourself? Probably not. But I'll bet you spend 5 to 10% if you lump everything together to protect yourself, between insurance, between that safer car, between alarms, between, if you're into the whole firearm thing, I'll bet you spend about 5 to 10% of your total, annual income on some kinds of protection. Maybe it's disability insurance or additional riders on, this, that, it. I'll bet you spend that much. And then it doesn't seem so ludicrous. Spending 5 or 10% of the total value of your business to protect it, that seems like a pretty reasonable argument. Now, I admit not every executive is going to fall for that, but they should, because it's reasonable. So at this point, you're now ready to sell risk management to your executive leadership. You've talked about the pain points, the threats, the impact. You've analyzed the environment. You've got a risk assessment in hand. You've either done it yourself or, of course, you should hire somebody like ANITIAN, right? But you've got that risk assessment in hand. You've got a set of solutions. You've got controls. You've got processes. You've got people. You've got a value proposition, cost versus value. Now you need to present a vision, not a plan, a vision. And that's that painted picture. A plan is we're going to implement this and do that, and we're going to get back Q1, and we're going to hire Joe and Bob and Fred and to do this. And that's a plan. No executive cares about that. So I don't care. But why would I? That's not my thing. You do that. Not a plan, a vision. Now the plan can come later, but first off, you need a vision. This new risk management security program we build will build strong, resilient infrastructure that our customers depend on for service. Something of that nature. Something that shows vision into the future. We're going to build a platform that this business can sit on top of and grow. We're going to build an IT infrastructure that is secure and safe. We are going to do things to protect. This is the vision, and that's ultimately what you're selling. You're selling that vision. You're showing them what the investment is. You're responding directly to those pain points that they identified themselves. What I've just essentially described to all of you is a classic sales approach. This is how anything gets sold. Whether you're buying a car, whether you're buying a new server, or whether you're buying risk management, this is how you get people persuaded to do it. Start with the pain they feel, walk through an analysis of that, and present your case and present an answer and give somebody the vision that there's a better future out there. You do this, you'll be able to close them. You'll be able to get that risk management program that you want. Okay, for the last few minutes here, I want to run through to help you and empower you guys a little better to understand what some of these common threats are. So I've given you a framework of how to have a better conversation with executive leadership. And now I want to kind of give you a little more underneath so that when you do start getting into those conversations, you're able to have a better, more informed conversation. You can really start talking about what are some of those controls and pieces that you need, okay? Now here's the thing you're going to notice. First off, these threats are all fairly simplified, and you're going to notice that a lot of the solutions are fairly common. And that's what we notice too, and it's something we talk to our customers about all the time. So let's start with probably the biggest, most common one, good old malware. Every company we've ever done a risk assessment for, this is the gimme threat. We all have a threat against malware, right? But it's malware. That's it. It doesn't need to go anything beyond that. Malware is viruses, worms. It encompasses a whole class of threats. How do you deal with that? You put protection everywhere. Multiple overlapping coverage to look for malware at every different level and point throughout the organization. Endpoint, core, perimeter, email, wireless, mobile, everywhere. Overlapping coverage. Traditional defense in depth approach, right? A good incident response program helps too, because when you have malware, you got to be able to respond to it. That's where you need that people and process. And of course, you need good logging. You need a good SIM out there getting all that data in. But you need a SIM that's got an actual person watching that data. Now, pay attention. That's going to keep coming up a few more times here, right? If you want to go a little further, you can talk about APT, because APT is kind of a special class of malware, right? This advanced persistent threat, malware that's nearly impossible to detect. How do you find that? Well, audit everywhere. Audit everything. Every activity needs to be audited throughout the organization so you can actually see what's happening. You need good change management, right? You need to be able to keep track of systems and the changes that happen. Sandboxing technologies are very good, whether it's Fortinet or FireEye or FireAmp or something else named Fire. They all have F in the name, right? Those are great technology. I direct everybody to the latest NSS report that just came out, which was really surprising, I might add. Like Fortinet and Trend Micro were like on the top. FireEye was actually pretty far down, which got FireEye pretty pissed off, I might add. Incident response, good threat intelligence feeds to know what's going on out there, to understand what attacks are coming in right now. Security analytics technology. This is a massively growing new area of security technology. There's some really cool stuff in there, like Cylance and CrowdStrike and Solara, which is part of Blue Coat now. And then there's one called Counterattack that I really like. And there's a bunch of them out there, and they're really cool. Cylance is actually really nifty stuff. But of course, you got to have all this going somewhere, which means what? You need a SIM with an actual person sitting there analyzing the data, being able to produce that intelligence, right? What about good old classic hacking? That's a threat that almost everybody has to some extent. We can get hacked, right? Hacked from the outside, hacked from the inside, right? Okay, they hack in, they exploit a vulnerability. Well, how do you deal with that? Well, the answer's right there in front of you, as you can see on the screen. And I don't think I should have to say this 50 times, but I feel like I have to. You got to patch. You got to patch and quit making excuses for not patching, okay? But let's get beyond patch management, because presumably we're all doing that quite well, right? Code review, web app testing, good app IPSs, all the controls, security training for those developers. That's a people thing. You got to have some, teach them how to be better developers, or work with third parties that have that already integrated into their DevOps teams. And of course, you got to have a SIM, and you got to have somebody actually looking at that data, not just plugged in by the VAR and then they walk away and never come back and talk to you again. You got to have all that log data somewhere. What about the third-party breach? Apparently, this was, some of the big breaches that have come out lately were all because of third parties that actually got attacked, and that's a very common threat we see for most of the organizations that we do risk assessments against. Well, mandate good security controls in your contracts. Mandate an annual audit of those third parties. And when we say an annual audit, we don't mean they fill out a questionnaire and send it back to you. That's a joke, and that isn't going to do you any good. We mean an actual independent audit of their organization from another party. Code reviews to outsource development. Universal gateways is a great strategy to getting third parties who have to connect into your environment. Don't work with their network. Make them work with your network. Build a universal gateway that everybody has to connect to, and that's where their restrictions and controls are implemented, right? Tightly control the access that they can see. And of course, you need a SIM logging all that data with actual live, living, real, intelligent human being sitting there actually looking at the data, not something that was tossed in at the last minute because some VAR told you totally got to get this gear. It's the best thing in the world, and then they never actually looked at ever again. You can see there's a theme coming with that one, right? Unauthorized access is a common threat. And again, it's a big concept that encompasses a lot of other little threats out there. Hardened hosts is one of the simple ways to deal with this. I direct everybody to look at the Nipper suite from Titanium. It's a great product, by the way. Also, not very expensive. Patch your systems, right? Two-factor authentication, yes, you actually have to have a SIM. Things actually have to get monitored. Good identity management is going to control this. Unique IDs for everybody in the environment need to happen. PII or a PHI breach. Again, very common threat that almost certainly any healthcare organization, if this isn't the top threat on your list of risks, it should be right near the top. Change management, central identity management, segment and isolate all the areas where there's EPHI or PII. PCI makes you do it. Why not do it for your PII as well? It's a good strategy. And of course, yes, you need a SIM with an actual living, breathing human being who's not sitting there on his Android phone tapping away on it all day, actually looking at the data and analyzing it and making sense out of it. So I did this section to hope that most of you would notice there's a trend to the controls and what you have to do to the solutions. First off, they're not that complicated. Most of them you guys probably already know. I don't feel like I probably told any of you anything you weren't already very well aware of. And they tend to be repetitive and overlapping, meaning the same control or the same fix actually deals with multiple threats. Now, executive leadership looks at that and goes, wait a minute, you're telling me if I implement a SIM with an actual live living human being and not some outsourced, I could care less about your entire company, that this would actually help me with multiple threats? Yes, that's correct, Mr. Executive. Well, why aren't we doing it? That's a good question. Why aren't we doing it? And that's the point. When you put it in this context, we have 20 threats to our business. And oh, by the way, a SIM with an actual guy running it would help on all of those. Well, now the investment doesn't seem such a big deal because I'm getting bang for the buck. I'm getting more than just a SIM because PCI told me to get a SIM. I'm getting a SIM that handles multiple threats in my environment. I'm investing in a new next-gen firewall because it handles multiple threats in my environment. I'm investing in better identity management because it will reduce multiple threats in my organization. And that, to me, as an executive, if I'm in that role, that's bang for the buck. I want that. I'll buy that. Okay, I'll make that investment. I'm getting 10 different things covered out of this. Of course, you need people to run them. You'll notice that was a trend and everything. And you got to hammer that point constantly because I guarantee you the VAR that just took your CIO to lunch and was like, hey, you got to get this thing. It's great. Everybody's got one. You would do that. Let me tell you, you do what? Ooh, it's going to be great. They're going to hard sell that to that CIO. He's going to come in going, we got to get one. We got to have one. Everybody's got. All the big boys have one. Why don't we have one? But they're not going to spend a tenth of a second thinking about who the heck is going to run that thing. Because now they've been sold on the whole cool idea that they're going to be rad and nifty if they get this next generation, whatever the heck it is. And that just doesn't work. And you gotta hold that down. Which the first thing I would tell you is don't anything in your power, don't let your CIO go out with VARs or salespeople. Don't let them take them to lunch because that you're just asking for it then, okay? You really need people to run it, and you got to get them thinking in those terms. The SANS top critical controls are a great starting point, okay? If you need to find a good framework of controls. However, I will warn all of you, don't spend even a second reading their whole metrics and service level stuff because they're ridiculous. SANS did a great job building that whole 20 critical controls, but some of the metrics they have on them are ludicrous. There isn't a company in the world that can meet some of those metrics. So don't pay attention to those. But the controls themselves are pretty good. The last piece I would mention here is you cannot replace human intelligence with a product. Products, controls are extremely important, but you still need people. You still have to have people running it. And that's why I say don't let your CIO go to lunch with a VAR. Okay, last little point, and then we've got a few minutes left for some questions here, which is executive leadership is skeptical because risk management is just confusing. They don't get it. Your job is to simplify that whole process. Talking threat, risk, and impact. Quit obsessing over the who's and who's doing it. Get down to those threats, right? Get the solutions dependent upon the threat. Now, this is an important little tidbit that we always are talking whenever we do trainings with CIOs and other executives. We always tell them the threat is first, the solution is second. Now, every VAR and sales guy you talk to is going to try and reverse that on you. They're going to try to tell you the solutions, the answer to your threat. Wrong. The threat has a solution, and that's your control plus maybe some others. Always put the threat first, and then the solutions become a dependency of the threat. That gets the whole framework working correctly. The other way around, and the industry has done this to all of us, The other way around is what gets you into the why am I buying this, what does it do for me? It gets you right where we are right now. Be specific about these costs. Don't go, well, I don't know, it might cost stuff and money and things. Specific numbers. And like I said, this is where you can get those VARs working for you. Right? Get them to pump out some quotes for you. I love doing that. Okay? And I know, you heard me say this many times, don't ever put a VAR or a salesperson in the driver's seat. And don't get me wrong, I got sales guys working for us too. They're a very valuable part, but don't ever, ever let a sales guy start to take control over your program. Okay? They're there to serve you. That's what I train my sales guys to do, serve. They're there to serve you. You need to drive. You need to be in charge. You need to make the sale to executive leadership. You let a VAR make that sale for you, you're going to have a rack full of equipment that doesn't do squat for your company, that's not managed and doesn't deliver any value. Okay, that's it for my presentation today. I hope this has been educational and helpful to all of you. If you have questions, you can ask them through the chat or the question process here. And I'm going to see if we have any questions coming in right now. Doesn't look like we have any questions. Well, that's great. If you guys do have any questions after this, oh, wait a minute. No, we do have a couple of questions. So the first one is, how do we make regulatory risk more sexy? That's actually a very good question. This process will help actually do that, because it becomes about the business, and that doesn't mean you can't infuse passion and excitement into this. Okay, so I think that part of that has to do in how you deliver and how you sell this to people. The excitement you really want to deliver here is we make these investments. It's going to make our business stronger. That's what the vision is all about. You notice when I said you get through this process, you talk of vision. Vision is something people will buy. People don't buy a plan. They buy a vision. And I say that to our customers all the time, and that's really a focus we use in our own businesses. We're not here to, a plan is easy. Anybody can come up with a plan, but a vision, that's harder to get to. So focus on building that vision and using words and language that's persuasive, that appeals to logic and ethics and emotion. What you want to be careful of is you want to be passionate, you want to be excited, you want to get their interest, but you don't want to over-sensationalize. So there's a fine line between a little bit of sensationalism, talk about the threats, talk about the attacks and the breaches that have happened. That's why some of these big breaches are good to help you make it sexy. One thing I would actually really praise Target as a company for doing is they've been very public about their breach, and that has helped the entire industry in a huge way. And so I would extend a praise to the executives of Target, saying thank you for being public, because you're helping all of us. Your pain is helping all of us learn. And so use those examples to help make it a little more sexy. But I can tell you one thing. When it comes to executive leadership, nothing is more sexy than I'm going to make you look good, or we're going to build something that's going to make us all money, or going to make us all, is going to make us all get a promotion, or going to protect our jobs. That's really sexy to anybody. You go to somebody and say, hey, I got an idea, and I'm going to let you take credit for it, and it's going to make you look great. You'd be kind of dumb not to take that. So that's how you make it sexy. Make it about them. Make it about the business. Okay? How do we measure the success of risk investments? Another great question. How do you measure the risk? How do you measure the success of risk investments? Very simply, you don't need complex metrics. You don't need massive reports. And this is another part of educating executive leadership. Let me tell you a story. I'll tell you a story of something we did at ANITIAN. It's a public story, so I can actually tell you the details. Many years ago, ANITIAN was involved in doing security testing of of an election system. So this is a public project. It's actually, our results are actually public, so that's why I can talk about it. if you guys remember from a few years ago, hacking election systems was a huge topic. Everybody was hot and bothered about that in a big way, right? We came to the table and basically proposed a sort of process and operations and everything that the end goal was that everybody was satisfied and there were no problems. There was nothing sensational about it, that it was frankly boring. And our client and everybody else who was involved in this thought this was impossible because there were so many competing different interests. You had the vendor, who is frothy and litigious. You had the electorate, which is frothy and litigious. You had the elections board, which is depressed. Anyways, you have all these competing factors. When we got to the very end of this and everything was good and it was a happy thing, I said, we have had complete success in this process because there's really nothing to tell you. Because the end point here is everybody is satisfied and there's really nothing to talk about. The greatest success in security is boredom, is nothing, is zero, is we have no problems. That is success, and that's an educational process of when you walk people through the threat exercise, the how to kill your business exercise. That's what you're talking about, is you're talking about we have these threats to steal our intellectual property. Okay, success for us in this is nobody steals our intellectual property. And every day that goes by where nobody's stealing our intellectual property is another day of right-on gold star success. So this is a case where you can't put it in, that's why numbers work against you in this. Everybody wants to metric size everything. Well, we're at 26. What the heck is a 26? No, today is a good day because nothing got broken into. Nothing got stolen. Success, day number 3,025 of the information security team is there are no problems, or the problems are something we can all handle. Now, again, you talk to executive leadership and you have this conversation and you have this dialogue with them. Most executives do get that concept. That isn't something weird to them. Where you have problems is when you're down beneath sometimes the executive leadership and you have those people who feel like they need a bunch of numbers and charts and graphs and other kind of nonsense to feel like they're doing something important. That's where you encounter the problems. It's kind of that middle layer, right? But executive leadership, I can tell you, they're just happy that there are no problems, and that's the ultimate metric that you have to deliver. Now, the tools and the products and all that will give you lots of spreadsheets and graphs and charts, and you can use all that to kind of help, pretty everything up. There's actually some really good tools that can help you with that, the Allgresses of the world and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, your ultimate success metric should be a great big zero. It should be there are no problems. There is nothing going wrong. And maybe that's a little naive of me to say, but I've seen it and it does work. So next question. How do we make it a strategic asset? I assume we're talking about how do you make this risk management process a strategic asset? I'm going to go off of that's my assumption of what you're asking here. By involving executive leadership in that threat exercise, the whole thing becomes a strategic effort. That's why we put that right in the beginning. That how to kill the business exercise, first off, it's fun. It's something that executives will probably like doing. And that's why you do it early on. It's something fun and interesting to them. That's how you get the buy-in, because now they're doing a process, something that is interesting to them. How do we kill this business? Right? And what's valuable to us as a business. That's how it becomes strategic. Secondly, the whole communication process of simplifying, of getting down to business risk intelligence versus big data, that's going to make the whole process strategic. That's going to raise it all up a level beyond sort of the day-to-day security reporting. Risk management and risk assessment is fundamentally a strategic effort. And by having the conversation in the way we've described throughout this presentation, you're going to transform it into a strategic action. The reason executives don't think risk assessment is strategic is because it's being done at the nitty-gritty, let's pick through each firewall, let's dink around with knobs and buttons, and let's bring in VARs and vendors to pitch us. To them, it's the day-to-day grind of IT, and that's not interesting to them. By elevating it up to a conversation about the entire organization, getting and putting the products and the who's and the what's behind you, it becomes a strategic conversation. And I hope that answered the question. So our last question is, or next question is, can you touch on how to select a control solution for your vision plan? Example, part of your plan is a web filter control system. There are hundreds of big names in the market. Where do you start? You start by knowing what your threats are and understanding what your vulnerabilities are, because you're never going to be able to pick a solution unless you know exactly what the threat is and what your vulnerabilities of the business are. Okay, so you have a threat of malware, right? What are the vulnerabilities in your organization? Well, do you have malware protection at your gateway? Do you have malware protection here? Do you have et cetera? Where are you having your weaknesses? Okay, so let's say you determine you have weaknesses at the data center level, for example, or at the remote endpoint level. Okay, I know I have some vulnerabilities here. Here's where my vulnerabilities are, and I know those vulnerabilities now. Now, the next step is I need a solution that's going to cover those vulnerabilities. You now, right off the bat, have a framework in which to work within. You have vulnerabilities you know about. They're clear in your head what they are. You can communicate those to that VAR or vendor and say, we have a vulnerability, and here's what it is. Here's what we're trying to do. But we need to cover these 12 vulnerabilities, not just this one. We also have all these other vulnerabilities. We have a vulnerability of lack of access control. You're going to look for products that basically are going to give you the most coverage across those and are going to maximize your value. And you're going to shortlist down to 3 of them, and you're going to pick one and go with it. And that's why that's why I'm so obsessive about always telling you, don't ever let VARs and vendors get in the driver's seat, because they're always going to steer you to whatever they can make money off of. And it can't be that. It has to be driven by you, by your requirements, by those vulnerabilities, by the threat. That is going to naturally put you in the driver's seat. And that's going to naturally put you in a position to direct the process and direct down to the ones you need and down to the ones that can provide that. Now, the other thing I would tell you is that in the pantheon of security controls, there is, I can tell you, and we say this to clients all the time, I mean, you could probably within 30 seconds figure out what the top 3 to 5 vendors are in any particular category. There you go. There's your short list. Have a nice day. Don't look at 10,000 vendors. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of money. Get down to those controls quickly. And this is something that also comes with time. And investing in outside assistance and guidance can also be helpful. The service we do, for example, is provide that kind of guidance. But again, to get back to my point is that when you start by talking about threat and vulnerability, you naturally have a framework in which to select the vendors that are going to fit those vulnerabilities and those protections best. Just like you noticed when I was talking about the controls, I kept going back to SIM. You got to have SIM. You got to have somebody monitor. That's because SIM stretches across lots of threats. That's why it's actually a good technology to have and an important technology to have. You'll notice that like next-gen firewall and UTM stretched across a couple. That's because it's a good control. It's an important control to have. Identity management was in a couple of them as well. And you'll notice that when you go through this risk assessment process that you're going to find that the vulnerabilities you have, there are controls that will stretch across multiple ones. And that now gives you a framework in which to select the correct vendor. Where do you start then ultimately? You got to start with a risk assessment. Okay. It looks like there is no other questions, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap up now. And thank you all for joining us today. I really appreciate you taking the time out. I know we're a little over time on the presentation. I want your feedback, so please tell me what you thought of this presentation. Send us an email. Visit our website. Let us know what you thought. Slides will be available on our slide share here shortly. We should have them up there within the next few days. If you'd like a copy of the presentation sent to you or a link, just go ahead and shoot us an email at info@ANITIAN.com. And again, thank you so much for joining us today. It was great talking with all of you, and I really hope this helps all of you in your risk management efforts. And I really hope that in some way, everybody here at ANITIAN can empower you to be a great security leader. Have a great day, everybody. Take care.